Hello. Good evening and welcome to the second session of the transition seats of the Braillard Architectural Foundation in Geneva. We're happy to host today three young architects that just came out from their studies that will talk to us today about a subject that they commonly decided to treat, which is the caring metropolis, Asian and European perspectives on territories on transition. So the idea is that the caring metropolis synthesizes and contrasts two responses to environmental, health, and social crisis. It's resisting an overconsumption of natural resources. And so the two approaches represent new paradigms for sustainable territorial strategies. The first presentation addresses the emergence of local communities that deal with the regeneration of the territory and the care of vulnerable people in times of crises. And this is done FREDHOLM, which is an architect that graduated from the Université Catholique de Louvain in Brussels, and her colleague Alexis MONTI, also an architect from the same university. So the second presentation proposes a microeconomic livelihood strategies as a foundation for environmental and community healing, and it will be delivered by Dan Narita, who is an architect and planner from the University Istituto Universitario d'Architettura di Venezia in Venice. So the two first colleagues are connecting from Brussels, and Dan is connecting from Hong Kong. So we're having a global presentation today, which we are thrilled to present to you. I remind you again, all of you that the audience, that we're setting up this series of conferences because we believe that ecological transition cannot be engaged different other ways than by having young people coming out of the schools, showing what things are possible, what things are imaginable, and therefore, in this way, convincing the broader circle of stakeholders, decision makers, the civic society, and of course ourselves, the architects that are supposed at some point to change the way we're doing, thinking, conceiving, and doing things, if we want to keep a 1.5 maximum average temperatures on the planet. So we're going to have today both presentations of about 20 minutes. And then we're going to have Nadia Casabella, who is with us today, which is a professor, an engineer and architect in the Louise Laboratory in the Université Libre de Bruxelles, also in Brussels today. And she's a co-founder of 1010 Architecture and Urbanism. I hope Nadia said that well. I said that right. She will comment on these two projects, bring her own ideas and feelings about these new approaches in planning and design, and then we'll open the discussion to the larger audience that we're happy to host this evening. So, Dana and Alexis, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Eh bien, bonjour à tous et merci pour votre présence. Donc, Alexis et moi allons présenter notre version bruxelloise de Caring Metropolis. C'est un titre qui nous a paru pertinent parce que donc caring, la notion de care va être vraiment centrale dans notre proposition, dans notre projet. Et Metropolis, ici, donc, fait référence au territoire bruxellois, métropolitain, et donc l'idée c'était vraiment d'avoir une dimension plus large que simplement ses limites administratives, et le projet va consister à renforcer la collaboration territoriale entre la ville, sa frange et sa périphérie, dans l'idée d'engendrer une transition vers un système plus résilient qui prévient et atténue l'effet des crises. Donc on va présenter ça en trois parties. La première, c'est on va rentrer de manière plus précise dans la problématique. La deuxième partie va présenter le territoire sur lequel on travaille. Et la partie 3, qui sera présentée par Alexis, développe notre intervention. Donc, le point de départ de ce travail a été vraiment la crise Covid-19. Donc, on peut voir ici, en région Bruxelles-Capitale, qu'on a eu des quartiers qui ont été beaucoup plus touchés que d'autres par le virus, dans les premières vagues. Et donc, on a voulu essayer de comprendre ce phénomène, et donc on a croisé ça avec d'autres facteurs sociaux, spatiaux, économiques. Et donc, on se rend compte que ces quartiers, qui sont en fait le long donc la partie nord-ouest de Bruxelles, sont aussi des quartiers avec une population ayant un revenu plus faible, un mauvais indice de santé. C'est aussi des quartiers avec des ménages beaucoup plus importants, donc plus de personnes sous le même toit, et qui ont une carence en espace vert, ainsi qu'une forte densité de population. Si on regarde ça à une échelle plus large, donc ces quartiers qui sont concentrés le long en fait, ils se trouvent dans le fond de vallée de la Seine, et dans ce fond de vallée, en fait, on retrouve aussi le canal et une infrastructure ferroviaire assez importante. Donc, en fait, on remarque que ces quartiers qui ont éprouvé plus de difficultés et qui s'avèrent être plus précarisés par rapport au reste de la population bruxelloise, sont en fait aussi les mieux connectés à l'ensemble du territoire métropolitain qu'on va essayer du coup de mobiliser pour notre projet. Ce qui est intéressant, c'est qu'en fait, on est parti chacun avec des problématiques très différentes. Pour ma part, ma question était de comment construire un réseau de maraîchage pour approvisionner Bruxelles avec une production locale, afin d'apporter une alimentation plus saine à la population, donc d'améliorer la santé, et aussi d'aller dans une transition du système alimentaire pour un système plus local et plus écologique. Alexis, lui, s'était posé la question de comment créer un réseau de lieux refuges à l'extérieur de Bruxelles pour éventuellement permettre à des populations plus fragiles de sortir de la ville en période de crise et bénéficier d'un environnement plus sain. Et donc, on a décidé, en fait, on a trouvé des points communs à nos propositions, on a essayé de faire un projet ensemble qu'on va vous exposer ici. Donc, le territoire qui nous a intéressés, c'est le territoire au sud de Bruxelles, donc dans la vallée de la Seine, qui est caractérisé par un réseau ferroviaire intéressant, auquel s'attachent des gares et des poches urbaines, résidentielles. On y retrouve aussi le canal avec des poches industrielles, donc des grands plateaux industriels qui ont bénéficié de cette infrastructure. On a aussi des importantes poches naturelles et surtout une activité agricole très importante sur les plateaux. Donc, pour rentrer de manière plus approfondie dans le territoire, on a défini 3 cadrages qui ont chacun des caractéristiques différentes. Donc, on retrouve le cadrage de la vallée industrielle de Beuzingen, avec donc une activité industrielle très importante. On a la vallée du Ain, qui est donc un affluent de la Seine. L'idée, c'était aussi de montrer que la structure qu'on propose n'est pas peut fonctionner dans d'autres lieux que simplement la vallée de la Seine, comme un de ses affluents. Et cet affluent est caractérisé par une grande concentration de quartiers résidentiels. Et alors, notre troisième cadrage, c'est Rebec. C'est une vallée beaucoup plus rurale, avec une activité agricole encore très importante. En coupe, on retrouve donc ces 3 cadrages, avec Beuzingen, la vallée du Ain et Rebec, qui sont connectés par ces infrastructures qui nous intéressent. On peut donc voir le parc industriel dans le fond de vallée, à Beuzingen, des quartiers résidentiels dans la vallée du Ain, et Rebec, qui est composé d'un relief un peu plus vallonné, avec des grands plateaux agricoles en haut. Ce qui nous amène donc à l'intervention. Alexis va nous exposer.
Oui, donc bonjour à tous. Donc on va commencer cette partie intervention en développant en fait le premier cadrage qui est Beuzingen. Donc Beuzingen, c'est un plateau industriel, et de manière identique à la façon dont on a analysé le grand cadrage, on a aussi rentré dans ce cadrage-là en décomposant chacun des acteurs qui composent ce paysage. Donc, dans un premier temps, on a analysé toutes les infrastructures qui traversent ce Beuzingen. Donc, on retrouve le réseau ferroviaire, auquel sont attachées 3 gares, la piste cyclable, qui, elle, est attachée au canal, qui relie Bruxelles à Charleroi, et enfin, le ring de Bruxelles, donc qui contourne Bruxelles, et dont une partie passe par ce cadrage, qui permet un accès en voiture à Boisingen. Ensuite, on a analysé les surfaces agricoles et les fermes qui composent voilà, tout ce cadrage-là. On retrouve différents types de fermes, des fermes d'activité intensive, donc qui, elles, jouissent, voilà, qui sont dans cette industrie agroalimentaire, des fermes abandonnées qui, elles, n'ont pas pu suivre cette activité intense, cette activité agricole intense, et enfin, des fermes d'activité moyennes qui s'étendent à échelle locale, voire nationale, mais qui, en termes de rendement, sont assez faibles en comparaison aux fermes d'activité intensive. Ensuite, la particularité de Boisingen, c'est que c'est un plateau industriel, et dans ces industries, on retrouve aussi différents types d'industries. Des industries abandonnées qui, elles, sont la résultante de cette ère post-industrielle que nous traversons aujourd'hui, des entrepôts aujourd'hui surdimensionnés par rapport à leur usage, et enfin des industries actives qui, elles, sont situées surtout au bord du canal et qui génèrent des matériaux de construction en fait, qui sont amenés directement à Bruxelles. Donc, voilà. Et enfin, des surfaces résiduelles qui, elles, ont un attrait qui ont une particularité à être questionnées. Donc, ces surfaces imperméables qui, elles, sont situées surtout autour de ces industries. Des surfaces humides, liées au fait que la Seine traverse ce paysage et donc humidifie évidemment les terres avoisinantes. Et enfin, les surfaces qui sont situées directement en bord de Seine, qui, eux, ont un attrait écologique et naturel assez intéressant à mettre en avant. Et donc, parmi tous ces acteurs de projet, on est venu faire une abstraction, en fait, extraire certains de ces acteurs afin d'en générer des leviers de projet capables de mettre en place ces idées qu'on a vues théoriquement précédemment. Et donc, parmi celles-ci, on retrouve donc en rouge les fermes abandonnées, en orange les fermes, les industries abandonnées, et ensuite tout un réseau d'industries, tout un réseau de surfaces attachées à la Seine et aux industries. Et donc, ce projet peut être en fait compris comme une histoire au travers de laquelle on vient remettre dans un premier temps ces fermes abandonnées, leur attribuer des terres pour leur redonner une activité économique. Ensuite, cette activité économique vient, elle, s'insérer en fait dans une activité économique existante qui est ici représentée en bleu. Et cette nouvelle activité économique ici en rouge vient se mettre dans le fond de vallée et permet de mettre en réseau ces fermes abandonnées aujourd'hui réactivées. La particularité de ce cadrage, donc la profusion de petites industries abandonnées peut être mise à profit pour faire des entrepôts de stockage de machines ou de nourriture. Et ensuite, dû au fait que Boisingen est relié directement grâce à ces infrastructures à tous ces quartiers qui ont été identifiés en introduction comme étant des quartiers où on retrouve par exemple un taux de chômage important. Ici, cette connexion permettrait de générer une possibilité d'emploi pour ces personnes qui viendraient donc travailler dans ce réseau de maraîchage assez fin qui peut se faire difficilement avec des machines et donc participer à la réactivation de ce territoire. Puis, toute cette production ainsi générée va suivre un certain flux. Une certaine partie de la production va aller vers le haut, vers Bruxelles, et une autre envoyée grâce au chemin de fer dans les autres parties de la vallée. Puis, en fin de journée, les personnes qui travaillent dans cette nouvelle économie sont invitées donc, à rentrer chez elles normalement. Mais à partir du moment où survient une crise, c'est là que toute la résilience du projet se met en place. Ces fermes qui avaient principalement un rôle économique et de point d'ancrage dans le paysage basculent en lieu refuge et permettent d'accueillir de manière plus temporaire, mais de manière prolongée, ces personnes qui travaillent à l'élaboration de cette nouvelle économie et donc leur permettre du coup de venir y séjourner de manière plus longue. Mais la particularité, c'est que tout le système économique ici mis en place est toujours mis à disposition du reste du territoire et la production ne s'arrête pas parce qu'une crise survient. Et donc ici, on voit voilà, de manière synthétique que l'histoire peut être lue de manière évidemment linéaire, mais les choses se croisent et évidemment se répondent l'une à l'autre. Et donc, pour sortir de la carte et rentrer directement dans quelque chose de plus concret, on est venu ici sélectionner certaines fermes, donc ici une ferme abandonnée, pour montrer une projection de comment est-ce qu'elle pourrait évoluer vers une ferme lieu-refuge qui permet d'activer le fond de la vallée. Donc ici, on a une ferme qui, en temps normal, s'occupe de la dépollution des sols et permet un accueil voilà, dans la journée des personnes qui viennent travailler dans le fond de la vallée. Ce travail de fond de vallée il peut être réparti par phase. Sur le court terme, de la dépollution, de la désimperméabilisation. Sur le moyen terme, une dépollution continue et une mise en terre de certains types de plantes. Et sur le long terme, on retrouve une mise en production de l'ensemble des terres due à une dépollution, on va dire, complète. Et ce système économique, cette nouvelle économie, perdure à la fois en temps normal et en temps de crise, lorsqu'une crise survient. C'est ces lieux refuges, ces fermes qui basculent et qui permettent un accueil, on va dire, temporaire, mais prolongé le long de la crise de ces personnes. Et donc, on voit ici que l'infrastructure de la ferme s'adapte à l'accueil de ces personnes par des petites habitations éphémères ou encore aménagement des entrepôts en habitation temporaire. Et donc ici, on voit une image où on comprend que la ferme active à la fois sa propre infrastructure et aussi le voisinage par un petit marché à l'avant de la ferme. Ensuite, la vallée du Hain, donc c'est cette vallée habitée composée de poches résidentielles. La façon dont on va procéder au travers de ce cadrage est la même pour comprendre les différents leviers de projet qu'on peut en extraire. La particularité, évidemment, c'est le contexte qui va faire varier les interventions dans la vallée du Hain. Donc ici, la particularité, c'est au niveau des infrastructures, cette chaussée qui vient perpendiculairement à la vallée de la Seine. Et ensuite, de manière générale, on retrouve les mêmes infrastructures qu'à Beusingen, le canal, les chemins de fer, le ring, qui permettent un accès à cette vallée. Ensuite, les surfaces agricoles et les fermes sont elles aussi décomposées, mais dû au fait que cette vallée est principalement résidentielle, on retrouve certaines fermes qui ont basculé vers une économie plus tertiaire de services. Et donc, on retrouve ici des fermes écuries et, par contre, de manière identique à Beusingen, des fermes abandonnées, des fermes d'activité intensive et des fermes moyennes, d'activité moyenne. Et voilà, et donc ici, on rentre plus dans la particularité de la vallée du Hain, qui sont ces poches résidentielles. On retrouve différentes typologies d'habitat. Ici, des quartiers de maisons ouvrières, avec des places qui leur sont associées. Et de manière plus récente, ces quartiers pavillonnaires qui viennent, on va dire, étendre le paysage. Et enfin, on retrouve aussi un ensemble de surfaces de poches résiduelles, surtout liées au Hain qui traverse ce paysage. Et donc, on retrouve des friches humides et des friches en bord de cours d'eau qui ont la même valeur écologique que celles qu'on retrouve le long de la Seine. Et donc, on vient extraire de nouveau des leviers de projet. Et ensuite, on projette ces leviers de projet dans quelque chose de plus concret, de plus abordable, au sein de la même histoire, avec la particularité que, en plus d'avoir des mouvements de saisonniers à travers ces fermes, on a aussi des mouvements internes des habitants entre ces fermes-là, car on va le voir, ces fermes, dans la manière dont elles sont aménagées, elles permettent à la fois un accueil de ces personnes, mais aussi un accueil des résidents de la vallée. Et donc ici, par exemple, on retrouve une ferme qui, dans sa situation initiale, est abandonnée. En temps normal, accueille un ensemble de cultures, d'expositions, d'art, de musées. Donc, on a une ferme ici plus, on va dire, artistique, culturelle, dans son activité propre. Et cette ferme participe à l'élaboration de cette économie en fond de vallée, mais cette économie prend aussi une allure plus ludique, plus pédagogique, avec un parc agro-urbain qui vient se déposer dans le fond de vallée de manière à faire donner conscience du paysage environnant à ces personnes qui habitent la vallée du Hain. Puis lorsqu'une crise survient, on voit que la ferme bascule en lieu refuge, cesse d'accueillir du public, mais permet aux personnes qui habiteront cette ferme de jouir d'un lieu de thérapie par l'art. Donc, certaines œuvres d'art seront conservées, on retrouvera des lieux de création artistique, etc. Et donc, de manière équivalente, on voit cette projection où on a un contact avec la ferme, en même temps avec la ville et les habitants qui viennent se mêler au paysage. Et alors, pour finir, je vais juste laisser Dana vous raconter l'histoire de Rebec, donc la vallée rurale.
Oui, donc pour notre dernier cadrage, notre dernière intervention, c'est donc au niveau de Rebec, où donc la particularité, c'est qu'on est dans un endroit très rural où on retrouve donc différentes infrastructures. C'est traversé par un chemin de fer avec des routes et le ring qui passe ici en haut. On a les mêmes activités qu'on retrouve dans la vallée du Hain pour les fermes, avec donc des fermes d'activité moyenne, intensive. On retrouve aussi des fermes écuries et fermes abandonnées. Et ces surfaces résiduelles qu'on retrouve le long de la vallée, qu'on va mobiliser ici pour notre intervention avec la réactivation des fermes abandonnées en leur offrant en quelque sorte ces surfaces. Donc on retrouve le même scénario avec l'attribution des terres, cette nouvelle économie, une main-d'œuvre qui vient et une production qui est distribuée sur le territoire, et puis une évolution, un changement en période de crise de lieu refuge. Donc ici, on a pris l'exemple d'une ferme où on a développé un scénario où cette ferme accueillerait des personnes âgées qui auraient besoin d'un retour à la nature dans leur vie quotidienne. Le fond de vallée ici donc, devient productif sur les surfaces inutilisées. Et en période de crise, les personnes qui bénéficient de l'activité de cette ferme, les personnes âgées, peuvent être par exemple maintenues, hébergées sur place pour rester dans un environnement sain en période de crise. Donc voilà à quoi cela pourrait ressembler. Et donc pour conclure, ici on a donc essayé de créer une vallée qu'on a représentée dans une espèce de représentation de synthèse et qui essaye vraiment d'exprimer cette nouvelle organisation du territoire bruxellois qu'on a conçue en réaction à la pandémie du Covid-19. Et donc, l'objectif, c'est vraiment de créer un réseau de production maraîchère dans le fond de vallée pour profiter donc d'un seul risque, de la présence de l'eau et d'infrastructures de transport, et de ces infrastructures qui bénéficient autant pour la main-d'œuvre que pour le déplacement des productions. Et ces nouvelles fermes mobilisées, créées, ont donc à la fois un rôle de production, de dépollution des sols et d'hébergement qui, en temps de crise, peuvent accueillir une population fragilisée pour leur offrir un cadre de vie sain. Voilà, merci pour votre écoute.
Merci Dana et Alexis pour cette présentation très précise et très succincte. Je pense qu'il y aura des questions. En tout cas, moi, j'en ai des questions. So thank you so much again. You're within perfect timing, and I'll pass the floor directly to Dan so that we can continue and wrap up with the discussion. Dan, the floor is yours.
Just to continue with the theme of today's presentation, Caring Metropolis, and me bringing in an Asian perspective to the discussion, I would like to start with a subleaf to try to link the two presentations and explain what the concept of the Caring Metropolis means for my research and my thesis. So obviously we know there's many different types of transitions that need to be tackled in order to achieve the UN SDGs. Specifically for my research, I'm sort of looking at three transitions: adaptation to climate change, green growth with no poverty, and people-oriented design of settlement. So as some three areas to work on. I would say that all of these three transitions require care. So in terms of adaptation of climate change, it involves the maximizing of nature-based solutions in the built environment, for no poverty, green growth, care, circular uses of natural resources, net zero electricity generation, people-oriented design of settlements, involves empathy, listening, and the distribution of care in communities. So I will now go into the details of my thesis. The focus of my thesis is in the Greater Bay Area in China. I'm currently based in Hong Kong, so I was able to do a lot of the field work research. I'm particularly focused on the in-between territories between the main urban centers. As you know, the Greater Bay Area is a megacity cluster of 9+2 cities, which form a new kind of synergy, yeah, to be competitive in the global market. Nevertheless, the territories in between seem to be sort of overlooked and neglected. So I'm in particular focusing on researching on alternative urbanities in the sort of peripheral regions, yeah, of the megacity cluster. Just to give you an overview of the underlying sort of research themes that guide my research interests are research on alternative urbanities in between territories, people-oriented, nature-based urbanism, and territorial metabolism. Just to set the scene for China, because maybe not everyone is familiar with this region, the initiatives, I would say mostly top-down initiatives of sustainable development in remote and in-between territories are coming from tech giants such as the Alibaba Poverty Relief Fund, which invest into rural and territories outside the megacity clusters. There is obviously the expansion of the e-commerce platform and the emergence of Taobao villages in rural areas, trying to sell rural produce via e-commerce platforms. There is the development of rural areas through countryside tourism, which is heavily supported by the government in China. And there is, of course, the expansion of retail distribution networks into rural areas, again, by a big retail suppliers such as Alibaba, but also JD, if you're aware. Now, this is one of the examples of Alibaba's pilot projects in one of the case study towns, villages, which I visited. Basically, it's an installation of a distribution center, which is a quite basic shop with one computer and a screen. And of course, it is debatable whether that's an appropriate approach for sustainable transformation of these territories. Another approach which exists in China is the New Rural Reconstruction movement, which is largely led by academics and intellectuals. Those are very often insertions of smaller cultural projects to try to preserve the local ethnic culture and traditions and artistic sort of life. Of course, the impact is smaller, constrained, or in a larger country such as China. Now, here is the Greater Bay Area, just in terms of a sort of brief description. It has an area of 56,000 square kilometers. It is a home of 86 million people, and it had a GDP of 1.6 billion US dollars in 2020. Here are some land use maps, a lot of mapping exercise, understanding the new infrastructural networks which are being built in the region and how they start to fragment the ecological capital, yeah, of the megacity cluster. And today I would like to focus on the bottom-up initiatives on the ground and focusing on bringing in people into the picture rather than looking at the top-down initiatives which I have presented before, led by the government mostly and tech giants. Just to explain this conceptual diagram. So it is inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs from psychology. And essentially, it suggests that the evolution towards an alternative urbanity in rural urban territories needs to start from the bottom up, having to satisfy at the beginning very basic needs to eventually arrive at a self-perpetuating livelihood activities, independence, and ultimately emancipatory urbanization in these in-between territories. Just a brief description of the research methodology, which is heavily led by research by design. It involves also a lot of field work, interactions with local people, mapping and scenario constructions in case study sites. Now, this is a map for the megacity cluster showing the hydrological network. The water reservoirs, most of them supplying water to the downstream region of the Pearl River Delta, where there is Hong Kong, Macau, Shenzhen, as well as Guangzhou. And particularly my case study sites are located in the upstream region, which supply the water to the richer cities downstream. And they actually generate a lot of revenue. Nevertheless, the income or revenue isn't invested back into the upstream. And the communities living at these water reservoirs are extremely impoverished. And most of the research in this area focuses on what to do about the ever-growing demand of water scarcity in the richest cities, but not necessarily looking at how the communities at these water reservoirs in the upstream region live, what their living conditions are, and what their social and environmental struggles are. Now, these are the sort of smaller villages in the upstream region, which I study in more detail. They are Chiguan Town, Long Bay Town, and Changshan Town. Long Bay Town was the village where we had the Alibaba pilot project, which I presented at the beginning. And here are some of the characters, local people, which I was engaging with during my field trips, trying to understand their existing livelihood strategies, their struggles in the villages, and how we can use their existing skill set and daily activities to transform their lives, to make a shift in their daily life and ultimately also affect the community at large. So here are some maps showing the water reservoir topography, as well as how it looks in the villages. They are mostly a mixture of agricultural and industrial activities, focusing on the production of construction materials. And some of the issues that I have found in these villages are, so there's heavy pollution in water and soil. There is illegal extractions of rare earth. If you're aware, this is minerals which are used for smartphones in the screen. Yeah? And there are criminal gangs which go into the farms and they acid wash the fertile soil, therefore damaging farmland. To sell rare earth, mental health issues, poverty. Now, this is the Taobao village. Similar problems, lack of adequate sanitation, inadequate social welfare provisions for elderly, but also people with mental health. Yeah. So, here are some of the sort of microecologies which I was starting to construct based on the interactions with local people, understanding the existing livelihoods, skill sets, and trying to embed more recent technologies in terms of clean energy generation, smart farming, and trying to overhaul sort of the economic system at a micro scale. Here, this was a sort of a restaurant owner trying to transition into organic farming and focusing on local produce. I mean, the ethnically people are from Hakka origin, so it's a very unique kind of ethnic culture locally, and they actually have a lot of tourism potential to actually attract and promote the local culture, which is different from culture in Hong Kong is, for example, Cantonese, which is different from Hakka, the local culture here. Now here, this was focusing on tea house hosting, renovating smaller houses and making them accessible for tourists, and diversification into drone delivery systems. So the tech giants, they also provide training for local people to be able to operate a drone to sell their goods. Yeah, so that's also the diversification, which is fairly common, yeah, in some of the villages. And here, this was a temple warden where I was looking at trying to sell Chinese medicine produce, yeah, in addition to the sort of tourist activities. Now, this was a kind of bus driver where we are trying to diversify into agricultural tourism sites. There's many sort of farms which become countryside tourism sites for people from the city. So bear in mind, we are not so far away from Hong Kong. It's actually just 600 kilometers, so 1 hour per flight. So a lot of people from the Pearl River Delta, the downstream, actually come to do a short holiday in these regions. Now, looking at scenario constructions, I was then looking at a sort of longer term strategy of constructing repertoires of potential interventions to increase the resilience at the local scale in the communities in 5 sort of levels: so renewable energy, pollution reduction, food independence, access to information, economic diversification, and social security. I should mention that these sort of 6 topics are based on the Chinese new type urbanization plan. So I was trying to relate my scenarios to actually government policy, yeah, so that it is some sort of in keeping or working together with a sort of high level policy. Okay, looking back into the villages themselves. So of course, looking at individual or family household overhaul of microecologies also needs to be supported by an improvement of social welfare and environmental infrastructure provisions. Perhaps this is missing in the approach from Alibaba and the tech giants, who basically they build roads, yeah, and sort of distribution shops, centers, but not necessarily looking at tackling education or mental health care or caring for the elderly, yeah, in the villages. So just my proposals for the 3 villages. Yeah. And then just to summarize, I think what we need is, I've been presenting mostly the bottom-up approaches, but I think what we really need, and this should really be a longer term research, given the fact that I'm working on a very big region, is the interlinking of top-down and bottom-up initiatives towards sustainable development and transition, and ultimately green growth. Now, to give credit to the participants of the fieldwork and field trips, I would like to just present some of the people who've been working with me during the research, and then conclude. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dan, for this very thorough work. Looks very much into planning, economy and life planning. Well, I suppose everybody around the table today is full of questions, but let's ask first Nadia Casabella, professor in the Université Libre de Bruxelles, You can speak French or English, depending as you feel. Nadia, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for these two presentations. Actually, very, very inspiring. And my first reflection, actually, I was very happy to listen to the presentation of Dan tonight, because I thought this is exactly what it was missing in the presentation of Dana and Alexis. And is this kind of, if we want to change the world, we need to understand the actors and the reasons behind their actions. And I felt very close to the type of approach that Dan kind of applied or deployed in his research, in the sense that, if I understood well, you really try to go and talk to the actors that are busy on the field with the actual transformations or sustainable transitions, and try to understand how they move forward and the reasons behind that. So I don't know, I would like to maybe, instead of me reflecting on the work of Dana and Alexis, maybe it's interesting also for you to say a word about that. Because I thought this was really very much kind of, I don't know if it's the word missing is the right term, but I thought that it was very nice to see the two approaches together. So the approach of Dan that is really looking at the actors and the motivations behind their actions, and the approach of Dana and Alexis that are rather looking still from a rather classical perspective, very much based around typomorphology and analysis of the built environment, but less sensitive towards the human dimension behind these landscapes. So maybe to ask both of you, what did you think of the other approach? How do you see the complementarities, or if you felt that indeed there was this dimension missing maybe in part of the work? Ok.
Ouais, en fait, du coup, comme vous pouvez vous en douter, là, on a fait un résumé de notre travail qui est beaucoup plus large que ça. Et là où je pense que l'approche de Dan, ce travail d'interaction avec des personnes faisait vraiment partie même du creux, du noyau de son projet. Nous, avant d'arriver à toutes ces cartes, etc., on a aussi fait ce travail de terrain, d'aller rencontrer des agriculteurs, d'aller rencontrer des personnes qui vivent dans ces quartiers de Bruxelles, d'aller rencontrer les personnes qui seraient même faire des sortes d'interviews avec ces gens pour leur demander si il existait quelque chose qui ressemblerait à ça, est-ce qu'ils seraient tentés ou pas d'aller y participer. Donc, nous, ça nous a plutôt servi comme base théorique et de nous donner plutôt des certitudes de projet, plus que vraiment en générer le noyau dur de notre projet, comme chez Dan, qui est aussi une approche ultra intéressante. Mais par contre, c'est quand même pas une dimension, c'est juste que voilà, on l'a peut-être pas exposé, mais c'est pas une dimension qu'on a omis de faire, parce qu'on est conscient qu'il n'y aura pas de transition ou de changement écologique ou quoi que ce soit d'autre sans une approche sociale intégrée et inclusive. Et du coup, ce travail a été fait, pas présenté. Voilà, pour notre défense, on va dire. En tout cas, pour montrer qu'on en avait conscience.
Oui, merci. Mais je ne sais pas, Dan, what would you think?
Comparison-wise,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think I would like to be very fair. I think it was a really nice presentation from Dana and Alexis, and I have enjoyed it. I've seen it actually the second time, and I think the second time really helped me to understand it much better, because we've been able to focus, zoom into some of the farms actually, and that was really helpful. Yeah. I think the difference is really not just that maybe I'm sort of like looking at the people and what their sort of daily lives and struggles are, but first of all, it's definitely a different scale. So I sort of toggle a bit from the regional and down to the sort of individual microecologies. I think Dana and Alexis, I would say, is very much on the territory, yeah, and a lot more focused on the spatial dimension of the project, yeah. Perhaps you could say also a little bit on the form when you look at, you know, the actual farm and the morphology. Yeah, I think that's the word. Yeah. So I think I wouldn't say that one is missing the other. I think it's just a different focus. Yeah, focusing on different aspects. Yeah, and any of these or both of these projects could develop, you know, that aspect as well. So I don't see why, you know, Dana and Alexis could not start to further investigate people. Yeah, I don't see, and I would like to be able to actually study the in-between territory from the regional and the microecology. So I think both projects have the potential, yeah, to complement, you know, each other and sort of fill in the scales and questions which they are posing. Yeah.
Yes, yes, obviously, I think, as I said, I think they are rather complementary as approach. There is no one better than the other. But it's kind of an intuition that I have lately, is that if you are, as an architect and as an urban designer, if you don't take the time to understand what kind of obstacles or hindrances these actors face towards the transition, I think you as an architect, you are not very well equipped to come up with alternatives or not even solutions to the problems. So this is the kind of thing, and I don't question that probably the work of Dana and Alexis has gone deep into this question, but finally in what is presented, and I have to say it's beautiful, very beautiful drawings and representations, and very complex as well, very intertwined. But I felt at a certain point in your presentation, like, yeah, okay, but the kind of solutions or the kind of proposals that you come up with, they don't seem very specific. They seem rather coming out of the generic box of solutions. I was kind of wondering, asking myself, to which extent taking advantage of all these interviews you made in the beginning would have informed and made these projects much more specific, in a way. So that, because at the end, yeah, of course, urban agriculture, peri-urban agriculture, but it's more about maybe the type of landscape that you can generate. And also knowing, for instance, that this fond de vallée, the floodplain, is if it's a territory or the farms have been abandoned in this particular area, is because the soil is very poor, is wet, and it takes a lot of effort, all kinds of effort, from soil regeneration to very specific techniques in terms of water management, in order to cultivate it, to put it to culture, actually. And then, yeah, it's kind of this reflection of saying, okay, maybe when we try to come up with answers, whether territorial or micro scale or in between scale, we need to really take the effort or make the effort to understand what went wrong before coming up with solutions, just to make sure that what we propose will have an impact on the actual territory. And there's, and also the second thing along these lines was related to the fact that I thought, yeah, the interventions are very much focusing on the building, on the build, and then not a lot of things are being said about the transformation or the evolution of the landscape. Whereas I found that in the introduction of the project, there was a very strong point being made about agroecology and how a different way of cultivating or putting this land into culture could generate a different type of landscape. And then, yeah, when you look at the interventions, the projects you were describing, they are very much based on what happens with the building, and it's about building more most of the time. So yeah, it was a kind of it was a personal reflection to say, first of all, maybe if we really want to transition into a different economic model, different livelihoods, we need to understand better what are the actual current obstacles, why this land is not already put into culture, why the Sene Valley is left rather to wildering type of projects, to place forest and not to plant or produce food. There might be a reason for that. And then a project like yours is really the opportunity to understand the reasons behind the current dynamics. Because if we want to reverse them, we need to understand what are the levers for action. But okay, I mean, it's just, it's for myself, is a question. It's not, I know that it's very difficult to capture the heart of the question, and I think you did a very good job to start with, and very inspiring anyhow. But I wanted to go back to Dan, maybe. When you were explaining the interviews and the more kind of, I would almost say, ethnographic approach to the actors, were you also trying to identify the examples of social innovation? So kind of in the sense of trying to identify or inventory the examples that you thought were close to the way these territories could evolve. Because this was not very clear to me. You kind of made interviews with the actors, but it was not very clear whether you were already trying to map the process of change that were happening already on site, and the kind of obstacles, again, so to understand from the obstacles these actors might encounter, how we could be much more performing, accelerate the transition in a way. This is my question.
I thank you for the question. I think it's a really good question, and perhaps I should shed a little bit more light into the field work, as well as the interview interactions with people. I have interviewed really a lot more than people than I have presented. Perhaps I have conducted about over 50 interviews, I believe. Yeah, and it involves actually having dinner with them, for example, or, you know, I don't smoke, but I would meet somebody and I would share the cigarette with a person, or I have the tea, you know, in a tea house or tea shop with somebody. And I have to say that I'm not sure whether the pictures were conveying it, but those are, you know, when you look at the development stages towards transition, yeah, those are settlements which are really at the bottom, where the basic requirements are not met. Yeah, you are talking to people who, I have a question in my sort of interview form. Would you use solar panels? Yes, they have heard. Their problems are what I'm going to eat today or tomorrow. Yeah, will I have clean water? Will I have enough water to drink? Yeah, what I'm going to do about, you know, my grandmother who is, you know, they had, for example, a fire station which would function as a community center. I mean, that answers a little bit your question. There are multifunctional uses for quite, you know, precarious infrastructure. So, for instance, I would walk into a fire station that actually works as a community center. Most of the people inside are, let's say, elderly or above middle-aged, playing mahjong. Yeah. So there is social organization, yeah, and sort of collective community centers, improvised, yeah. There, I even found it was, you could not really call it a school for disabled children, but it was a shop, yeah, that was used as a school for kids with disabilities, yeah. So people self-organize themselves, yeah, to deal with these problems. Yeah, so I would say that the initiatives exist, yeah, where I'm coming in with my scenarios, and you have to be very sensitive about doing it, and there needs to be obviously a lot more work together with the communities, but introducing them to new tools, yeah, embedding new technologies, yeah, showing them, yeah, this can be done, yeah, and it's a little bit tricky because I'm aware that their everyday problems are very different. They don't necessarily think about, oh, you know, am I going to install, you know, a wind turbine or the solar panels, yeah. So there is still a very huge gap. So to answer your question, yes, there are bottom-up initiatives in which the communities organize themselves, yeah, to deal with problems, yeah. But perhaps I'm not entering at the right level with my interventions yet, yeah. I think that would be fair to say. And in terms of the interview which I held is, I think the people I talked to, they totally understand what I'm talking about. Would you use clean energy? Yeah. You know, would you rather ride a bike? It's all understood, but I think that they are so a little bit disillusioned. You know, it's how can I say, they don't perhaps have, or they need more encouragement or hope, yeah, to embrace, yeah, these ideas, yeah. And again, it comes down to that you first need to satisfy very basic needs so that, you know, stage by stage can, you know, move up in terms of evolution of these settlements. I don't know whether that answered your question, but.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a very important question. There are two issues that you address, which I find particularly important. One is the question of the scale, at which scale we intervene, or what scale can be the most, having the biggest impact in a way. But the other thing that interests me also highly is this aspect of taking responsibility. So kind of understanding what are the problems at hand. So you just mentioned it, and also during the presentation, water management, having water access to water, access to energy, whether sustainable or not. These kind of territorial inequalities that have a very huge negative impact in the way these territories can transition. So that I find it very, very important, the fact that you recognize these territorial inequalities and try to find the right scale at which these territorial inequalities could be addressed, and the entire metropolitan area could move forward into more sustainable ways of living, of course. But I think this interdependence is very important. The fact that there might be cities where all this water is being redirected towards, or where the agricultural produce of these rural areas is being grown and being transported, but there is not a kind of balanced relationship, or there is no interdependency being developed between these two sides of the economic
yeah, I think my answer is would be really to what I was trying to explain, having these repertoires of potential interventions, yeah, building your microecologies and not having to rely on giving away your natural resources, yeah, yes, to the downstream, the wealthier cities, and there's nothing coming back to reinvest develop these areas. So invest into your micro scale to build, you know, local scale resilience, yeah, so that you don't have to sell out, yeah, your natural capital, yeah, yeah.
Yes,
if you please allow me, Nadia.
Yes, please.
If I can just organize a little bit the last part of the discussion, so we can open the floor a little bit to this very amazing audience we have tonight. I recognize very important people around the table. I see Alexander Schmidt, I see Denise Pumin, I see I see Roselyne Deletrange from Brussels. So I see Roselyne has her hand lift. So Roselyne, the floor is yours.
Buenos and good night, everybody. Bonsoir Dana et bonsoir Alexis. Je connais bien votre travail. So I have two questions. Maybe one is for the three of you, Dana and Alexis, and the other one is for maybe the general audience, and it's a question for all of us. The first one is, I'd like to elaborate a little bit more about this difference you've been mentioning, Dan, between the territorial and the spatial approach. What is this difference? I wonder, it's a real question as Nadia. To me, mustn't the transition design be permanently transcalar and permanently and systemically both territorial and, I guess, for you spatial is the local scale, but also systemically social and spatial, so embedded actually into the very concrete landscape, and the landscape is social and is spatial and is embedded in the long-lasting history. And when you do that, then maybe you can avoid some, I would say, difficulties we've been discussing with Alexis and Dana when they were drawing a farm in the lit majeur de la rivière and drawing kind of cultivation that actually cannot happen in this place because of the flooding, of the regular flooding, which is a natural process of the river. So yeah, first of all, this question of the difference between a territorial approach and a local and I would say small scale approach. I'm not sure we can really disconnect them. This is my first question. And the second one, I will ask it in French. Pour équilibrer un peu, mais je me pose la question, je voudrais d'abord vous remercier, vous féliciter tous, so congratulations for the beautiful works for the three of you. Mais je me pose la question de savoir jusqu'où est-ce qu'un architecte peut dessiner. Est-ce qu'un architecte peut dessiner de l'agriculture? Est-ce que on est légitime? Est-ce qu'on est apte à ça? Est-ce qu'une agriculture peut être dessinée? On peut faire un projet de grand paysage. Évidemment, il faut travailler avec les gens de terrain, les gens de métier, et ce sont des métiers en pleine transformation. Mais jusqu'où est-ce qu'on peut dessiner? C'est vraiment une question. Et donc, ça renvoie à cette très, très belle image que vous avez produite, Alexis et Dana, à la fin, votre fresque. C'est un peu comme une utopie, je dirais. C'est une image. Et il ne faut pas la confondre avec un projet. Et donc, je pose vraiment cette question. Je la pose à Panos aussi. On a travaillé sur dessiner la transition.
Yes,
jusqu'où est-ce qu'on peut dessiner la transition? Voilà.
Yes, we had a very big discussion many years ago. Someone on the Greater Paris, we were talking about territorial, regional design, not regional planning. And I think there are people around the table tonight that are, Beatrice Marioli is here, who has also worked on that, and many others. So I think the very good question. I mean, these are kinds of questions we want to have around the table these days to continue working. So anybody, Dan, Dana, Alexis, who wants to, to open, just don't worry. There's no wrong answers here. It's about understanding where we're heading to. Où est-ce qu'on va?
Moi, je voulais répondre. Donc,
bien sûr.
La raison pour laquelle aussi on s'est proposé pour la fondation, dans le cadre de ces conférences, c'est qu'on parlait justement dans l'annonce, c'était aussi parler d'utopie liée à la transition. Et c'est vrai que du coup, on s'est senti plus confortable à venir proposer notre travail, puisqu'il y a effectivement tout un aspect très utopique, dans le sens où on vient créer un système qui qu'on a un peu sorti de notre tête et qui était, pour ce qui est de la production alimentaire, c'était l'idée d'un peu un retour à, il y a cette image au tout début où on reprend la carte Ferraris la vallée de la Seine a eu un rôle de production alimentaire pour la ville. Et donc, c'était une sorte de mettre en quelque sorte confronter un système qui a existé avec le système aujourd'hui, qui est évidemment beaucoup plus complexe puisqu'il y a des choses les choses ont effectivement évolué. Et donc, il y avait effectivement cet aspect utopique. Et il y avait aussi que le dessin qu'on crée, c'est dans l'objectif de montrer d'autres perspectives que celles qu'on a aujourd'hui.
Une sorte d'allégorie, en fait.
Oui, voilà.
Je pensais aussi à l'allégorie du bon et du mauvais gouvernement à un moment donné. Et on a tous en tête, j'imagine, good and bad government in the fresque, the famous fresque. Yeah. Anybody else? Dan, on this utopia question? Maybe you have the opposite way of thinking.
Sorry, can you maybe summarize the French question very briefly, just to make sure I didn't misunderstand?
Yeah, Roselyne.
Yeah, the French question was, the second part is addressed actually to everybody, to all of us, I guess, is till where can we actually design when we work on those agricultural fields, you know, regions and questions actually, till where can we design?
I think the activity of design is, to me, very broad. Yeah, you can design an economic system. Yeah, you can design how a community functions, a network of people interact to a certain extent. Yeah, so I don't see. I mean, maybe that leads to, you know, what does the architect actually do? Yeah, on such projects. I think architects can engage as activists. Yeah, and trying to sort of guide, yeah, or try to help, yeah, in a sort of community organizations. I don't think why we cannot call it design. But I think if you, again, you know, if you enter these sort of circumstances as an architect, yeah, one entry point could be soil. Yeah, you start to look at what is the contamination in the soil. Yeah, and you, depending on what the contamination is in the soil, you can start to have informed design decisions about, you know, what do you do, yeah, with this layer at, you know, at that depth of the soil. Yeah, does it need certain remedial strategies? Yeah, certain planting choices depending, yeah, on what is found on the ground. So I do think that as an architect, you can, you know, make propositions.
Nadia has something to say there.
Yes, maybe I want to also give it a try to this question. I totally agree with what Dan was saying about the different ways of designing a landscape. But if we stick to the morphology of the landscape, if this is a question you are posing, I think landscapes have been designed for centuries already. Maybe they were not designed like a polder in terms of how to plant the trees or what kind of structures in terms of tiles or boundaries, vegetation boundaries, or in between kind of all the gradients of vegetation you can think of were planned. But landscapes are infrastructure also. So you can design a landscape because of the road network, because of the water, because of the planting, the trees, the wind. All landscapes have been designed always. So I think maybe what you try to ask is how competent or what kind of tools or abilities we do develop as architects in order to design these landscapes. And then, yeah, it's true that we cannot, it's like the plan of a city or a regulatory plan. You don't want to design everything down to the smallest detail, but you provide a casco, a structure that organizes the functioning or the appropriation the landscape or a piece of city without having to define till the last tree or field. So I think you can, landscapes have been designed, and I think you as an architect can design a landscape, both spatially, but also from the more functional perspective or the more actor-based perspective that Dan was referring to. I think I would invite everyone to.
Si je peux rajouter quelque chose, enfin.
Oui, bien sûr, Alexis.
Au début, la question, elle m'a un peu saisi, jusqu'où un architecte peut dessiner, parce que, enfin oui, c'est une question évidemment qui est assez large et puis elle pose beaucoup de questions. Mais en fait, moi j'ai l'impression qu'on peut dessiner, enfin, jusqu'à l'infini, tant qu'à un moment on se rend compte de où est-ce qu'on est compétent et jusqu'où est-ce que là où on est compétent, on bascule dans un design. Et du coup, c'est quoi un design et un dessin? Et je pense qu'à un moment dans notre travail, la raison pour laquelle on a terminé notre projet par un dessin et pas par un plan ou par une carte, parce que c'est un projet qui était très ancré dans le paysage, c'est parce qu'à un moment, on a senti qu'il y a des formes et des choses qu'on voulait mettre en avant, des choses pour lesquelles on voulait soulever des questions, mais pour lesquelles, évidemment, quand on se pose la question de la direction, des traces d'un champ ou quelle essence d'arbre spécifique il faut à cet endroit-là, ça ne relève pas de notre domaine. Mais ça ne veut pas non plus dire qu'on n'a pas le droit à mes yeux, qu'on n'a pas le droit de le dessiner ou de le mettre en avant, parce qu'à un moment aussi, en tant qu'architecte, je pense que notre but, c'est aussi, comme on se saisit de beaucoup de questions qui vont au-delà de simplement les limites d'un bâtiment. D'ailleurs, on le voit dans notre travail, on commence par des questions sociales, sanitaires, environnementales, qui ne sont pas des questions directement propres au dessin d'un plan. Ben, c'est juste qu'on se sert d'outils qui sont tellement larges qu'à un moment, ben, en fait, si les points d'entrée sont très larges, alors pourquoi est-ce que les points de sortie aussi, si à un moment ils quittent cette notion du design, on peut aussi les dessiner à mes yeux. Et donc, je comprends la question et du coup, je rejoins Nadia, si j'ai bien compris, plutôt ça aurait dû tourner dans jusqu'où on est compétent, mais je pense que en tout cas, là où on est compétent en tant qu'architecte, c'est surtout pour aussi soulever des questions et permettre à d'autres personnes de venir participer à ces questions-là qui sont soulevées. Et le dessin, qui est notre moyen de représentation premier, d'expression premier, de communication, est cet outil-là. Et donc, jusqu'où on peut dessiner, pour moi, c'est les limites dans le cerveau qui nous arrêteront de dessiner.
Ok, merci
Voilà.
Alexis. Je pense que Roselyne, tu as eu ta réponse.
Mais pratiquement, non, on est parti pour toute la nuit là si on veut. Non, mais merci beaucoup pour vos réponses. Je voudrais juste dire, j'ai peut-être mal posé la question quand je suis bien sûr d'accord avec Nadia. Je suis paysagiste moi-même, donc j'ai aucun problème à dessiner le paysage. Ce que je voudrais dire et que je trouve magnifique dans l'approche de Dan, c'est qu'effectivement, ce que je voulais suggérer, on peut dessiner, mais notre crayon doit être, et je crois que c'est une clé de cette fameuse transition, à l'écoute des gens qui fabriquent ce paysage, effectivement depuis des siècles et qui le dessinent. Et donc, je voulais juste attirer l'attention sur le risque d'imaginer des utopies qui restent en fait hors sol, même des utopies qui sont des projets de sol. Et les gens qui connaissent le sol, c'est les gens qui ont les mains dedans tous les jours. Donc, je voulais juste insister là-dessus. Merci beaucoup, je ne vous dérange plus.
Thank you, Roselyne. I think one other thing that I suggest, I imagine you have behind your question, is the fact that we know how to design this metric, the metric of length, of width, of volume, but the new approach of transition asks us to understand other kinds of metrics that are not anymore the meters, square meters, cubic meters, but could be caloric, apport calorifique, other kinds of substances, other kinds of quantities and qualities that up to now architects didn't have in their palette, because actually, yes, what we discussed before with Nadia, the schools didn't teach them. So if we want to design the transition, there probably both Alexis, Dana, and Dan would have to be equipped with a series of metrics that we have to invent, including the CO2 reduction metrics, for example, et cetera, that we don't know yet how, I mean, our plans, if I take Alexis's and Dana's design, or utopian design, which is perfectly utopian, you're right to do that. For the moment, because we're trained the way we are, we can only understand it as a spatial information. Normally, in the next 10 years, all of us around in this table should be able to read this plan, this design, with other filters of knowledge that we don't have right now. So what we're trying to understand today, I think Dan had it very clearly with the little pictograms. The pictograms of Dan should normally inform and be translated in spatial metrics, if space counts, as the famous geographer said 10 years ago, what's his name? So Edward Soja, right? Everybody knows him, he's dead now. So if space counts, other metrics than spatial metrics should be there to help us with that. Now, the question is, how do we do this? Who brings it down? Who boils down CO2 tones into space? And anybody else? This is open questions, of course. So it's not about answering them now. It's anyone else wants to jump in? Autre question? Yeah.
Panos, may I jump in?
Yeah, sure. Who is this?
Paul Leach.
Oh, hi. Hi. Glad to meet you again. To see you again. Go ahead.
My question is really about the context of professional thinking. And I was greatly taken by the presentations, and they are in quite different cultural, political, economic, social contexts. So my question is, I'd love to hear a little discussion of the difference between interfering or intervening or trying to catalyze change in an existing cultural dynamic where there are strong determinants, such as Dan mentioned about worrying about a grandmother or what to eat next or whatever, but where there's a very well understood consensual culture, which can in fact evolve, that within that culture it is possible, in fact possibly greater opportunities for step change. And on the other hand, where I'm living in Ireland, where we finally have a government which has adopted legislation, has just adopted carbon budgets, and is now in the public domain pleading and begging the consumerist society to reprioritize, and that is a very steep gradient. So I would love to hear some discussion about our illusions, about what we mean by the free world. Can we afford that degree of license as opposed to liberty? Or are there established cultures where evolutionary step change is possible? And I finish by saying that my own prejudices were completely upended by being asked to go to China on an ILO mission to look at eco-villages in China. And all of my prejudices othering of China were upset. And my admiration soared for 10-year plan thinking, for moving at scale, for transformative change to which there was consensual, with which there was consensual momentum. So I don't know if that stimulates any responses.
Certainly is. I'm sure there are people thinking lots of stuff after what you say. Maybe Alexander, who knows very well China, both Western Europe and China, wants to jump in.
I think the title, The Caring Metropolis, is beautiful. But then starting with the little villages in China, which are supposed to be behind us, I think this is such a contradiction, and I love that very much, because maybe they are ahead. And I wonder how you want to link that with architecture or with scale. I'm aware that this is very much linked with scale, but I have the feeling that this is also a matter of social dimensions. Having been in China a lot and also in villages and looking at the new focus of social, cultural aspects in the countryside and trying to learn from that for the cities, and the central government is supporting that a lot. The design school where I'm teaching, the students are working on rural challenges and village redevelopment, and I'm observing that they are rediscovering the rural or the agricultural and rural landscape, and many people moving into the landscape. And I think if we want to learn from that, we need to look much more into the neighborhood scale. And this is already another scale. We need to, of course, revolutionize the architecture, but I think we are far away from that, because look at the architecture, what is happening worldwide. This is not that scale. Therefore, I think the caring metropolis could be a new guiding image for working on the city, working on districts and neighborhoods, even small clusters of houses, where we have to start. From my point of view, this is full of question marks, but positive question marks, not negative.
Thank you, Alexander. Anybody else wants to step in and comment on or question the two projects? I myself, while people are thinking, maybe someone wants to raise his or her hand in the meantime, I think that this utopian question is an important question for us, because at some point, well, it's maybe more Western than Eastern, although I'm not a specialist of the Chinese culture, but a utopian image is a Wunsch. In German, we call it Wunschbild, right, Alexander? It's the end image, the desired situation, which we want to tend to. And I think that Alexis and Dana had the courage to design a desired image, and actually even design a desired algorithm of behavior, a behavior algorithm applied on a landscape. That's what it looked like, at least in my eyes. So, which was not the case of Dan, because probably Dan had spent more time, and Dan was much more absorbed by the individual stories and scenarios of life, which made him understand a pattern, like a mosaic of life systems that crisscross each other and are much harder to maybe, or at least in any case, the way we saw it, we had almost a matrix of proposals, a matrix of solutions that were shown, and where we can pick and have an a la carte situation depending where it goes and what the social situations are. Whereas the first case study was an algorithmic utopia, I would say, if we put it this way, with 2 or 3 parameters as options from which we can choose. But I think if we combine both in different ways, there can be very interesting solutions coming up, depending on how close, as Alexander said, how close you go to the nodal scale. The nodal scale in both cases is the neighborhood. Neighborhood is a nodal scale, right, Alexander? Not?
It just comes to my mind. I don't want to be retrospective, but what about a new pattern language?
Architects understand.
Well, there are enough architects here.
It is a pattern language, but the question now that Roselyne raised is, how do you put in this pattern also non-spatial questions like food questions, food systems?
Right, but this could be included into patterns too.
Yeah, That's for sure.
It's a new dimension for pattern.
I personally agree. The question is, how would you teach it? How do you make it in the teaching system? How you bring it in the school and you mix it up? Any other questions? I think I must say I find this discussion very inspiring. Nadia, yes, go ahead.
So that everyone was laughing at this pattern language. Just wanted, I couldn't miss the opportunity to say something about that. Yeah, I think if there is something that might distinguish the type of projects we were listening to and looking into this afternoon from pattern language, I think honestly, and this is what interests me the most, is this not being afraid of complexity. And the pattern language, what it did was to kind of get rid of this complexity and think that you can simplify the questions in order to provide an answer that is more or less standard across the board. And I think in the case of Dan and also Alexis and Dana, there is this will and almost need to engage with this complexity. And this, indeed, these images they produce, Dana and Alexis, is kind of more oniric, you could say, landscapes, but also the axonometrics that you could see in Dan are trying to engage with this multi-layer, multi-stakeholder, multi-whatever, and trying to interact with this complexity without reducing it. So yeah, I think maybe it's we are in a different moment, and pattern language, as good as it is, because I think it's a highly inspirational tool, has demonstrated its limitations if we want to really, as Panos was inviting us, to create a different type of architect.
Thanks so much, Nadia. I evidently we agree with you. Thanks for coming, all of you here today. We'll be happy to have you again next month. It was an excellent discussion. The level was very high, and I really thank you all. So have a nice evening, and see you soon next month. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Bravo, Dana. Bravo, Alexis. Bravo, Dan.
Merci. Merci.
Merci, bonne soirée.
Bonsoir.
Bravo, Dan.